BBC Television brings you the best in sport. The sights and sounds of a superb summer of sport, including the World Cup from Mexico, on BBC Television.
And now, on BBC One, to celebrate the Queen's 60th birthday, we present our affectionate portrait of Her Majesty from childhood to the present day. Happy birthday, dear ma'am.
Happy birthday.
And many, many happy returns on a great day. Happy birthday.
Later this evening at 10:10, we'll be looking back at the highlights of today's royal events. And a new BBC book celebrating the Queen's 60th birthday, called Tribute to Her Majesty, is now available.
Programmes for Tuesday evening on BBC One. At 7:30, Angie returns from holiday in EastEnders.
Chance for a drink, Mrs. Ross?
Certainly, darling. What would you like? Arsenic?
In 1 by 1 at 8 o'clock, Manford Park prepares to open to the public.
You're so carried away with all these sideshows, you're forgetting what the park is about.
At 9:35, the Kenny Everett television show.
Come in.
A Case of Duty in Miami Vice at 10:05.
What she did was right, because when it comes to what is and what isn't, you don't know squat.
In Film 86 at 10:50, Michael Parkinson reviews Remo, a James Bond spoof. Marie, a true story starring Sissy Spacek. And The Lightship, a drama with Robert Duvall. At 11:25, St George's Hall at Windsor Castle provides the magnificent setting for the banquet given by Her Majesty the Queen in honour of King Juan Carlos and Queen Sofia of Spain. Programmes for Tuesday evening on BBC One.
Well, back to Monday evening, and in half an hour, in a change to the scheduled programme, Panorama reports on the ramifications of America's strike against Libya. That's here on BBC One.
The 9 o'clock news from the BBC with Julia Somerville and Andrew Harvey.
The Queen's 60th birthday, a celebration in song and flowers.
Europe's foreign ministers agree to clamp down on Libya's diplomats.
And the American attack on Libya's second city, we have the first report.
As police search for Sarah's killer, they ask, is there a link with other child murders?
Good evening. The Queen is at the Royal Opera House tonight at a gala to celebrate her 60th birthday. It's the climax to a day of celebration which she's shared with her family and her people. The threat of terrorist attacks has meant huge security precautions, but the Queen was determined that she was going to share this special day with ordinary people. It began in torrential rain at Windsor with a service of thanksgiving, but by this afternoon the clouds were lifting and the sun shone down on thousands of schoolchildren who sang a special birthday song under the balcony of Buckingham Palace. Afterwards, the Queen went down to thank them and received in return thousands of daffodils. Tonight it's a much more formal scene altogether, with the worlds of music and the arts paying their tribute. Laurie Mayer reports on a day to remember.
The Queen arrived at St George's Chapel, Windsor, under grey skies and April showers. She was met by the Dean of Windsor, Michael Mann. Inside the chapel, the shrine of British royalty, the Queen Mother with Princess Margaret and other members of the royal family had taken their places in the choir. It was the largest gathering of the House of Windsor for many years. The Prince and Princess of Wales were accompanied by an eager Prince William, who wasn't on the official guest list. He was only allowed to go at the last minute. Miss Sarah Ferguson, with her fiancé Prince Andrew, also shared the family celebration. It was her first appearance with royalty on a public occasion. Then Princess Anne and Captain Mark Phillips with their 2 children. As the Queen led her family through the nave, there were no fewer than 45 members of the House of Windsor in the congregation. The service of thanksgiving for the life and work of the Queen ended shortly after midday. Then came the Queen's first birthday surprise. Much to her delight, she found in her carriage a huge birthday card signed by members of the royal family. And there was a right royal welcome waiting on the wet streets of Windsor, packed with well-wishers cheering and waving. The Queen laughed and joked with Prince Philip as the procession set off for a family lunch at Windsor Castle. Young Prince William tried his hand at a royal wave. The enthusiasm of the crowds rose above the weather and the worries about royal security. Sarah Ferguson looked thoroughly happy and relaxed after her important debut. The highlight of this afternoon's celebrations was a huge parade along the Mall, complete with bands and banners. Over 6,000 children clutching 120,000 daffodils in a living bouquet for Her Majesty. The children from all over Britain and the Commonwealth brought with them a magnificent crown of spring flowers. Tens of thousands braved the weather to wish the Queen a happy birthday in person. There was huge excitement as the Queen walked onto the balcony. This increased with an unexpected appearance by Prince Andrew and his fiancée. Then the band of the Grenadier Guards struck up for the children's special birthday song. The Queen seemed genuinely moved by the children's tribute, smiling and applauding heartily. And the children, well, they sang on. This rousing performance was rewarded when the Queen came down to thank everyone personally and gather up great armfuls of flowers. She was joined by Miss Ferguson and Prince Andrew, who threw themselves into the task with obvious enjoyment. This evening, the Queen is attending a special gala at the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden, a celebration in words, music and dance of her life and reign. But when she arrived there a short while ago, she began her birthday evening with a royal walkabout in the piazza, meeting some of the stallholders in the Jubilee marketplace, receiving a birthday cake with royal blue icing, and once again being inundated with flowers. The warmth of the public welcome must surely remain one of Her Majesty's most enduring memories of a memorable day.
Well, behind today's celebrations, there's been a huge security operation. The fear of reprisals after the American air raid on Libya meant hundreds of extra police on duty in Windsor and in London. They included marksmen on rooftops and plainclothes officers among the crowds.
In Windsor this morning, police lined the route of the royal procession long before the crowds began to arrive. Occasions like this always mean a big security operation, but fears of retaliation for Britain's role in the Libyan attack brought some of the most stringent precautions ever seen here. The 2 miles of sewers underneath the castle were combed inch by inch. Security experts checked every house in the warren of cobbled streets nearby. This morning, every manhole cover was double-checked. Even the window boxes and flower beds were thoroughly searched. Every letterbox in Windsor was emptied and sealed. As the streets filled up, plainclothes detectives with sniffer dogs mingled with the crowds and searched buildings along the route. But the Queen had made it plain that whatever the fears for her safety, she would not be kept away from her people. Only the torrential rain prevented her travelling through the streets of Windsor in an open carriage. In London this afternoon, police were again much in evidence as the school children gathered in St James's Park. From the roof of Buckingham Palace, police kept a watchful eye on the large crowds. Several approach roads were closed. No one was taking any chances today, even though major security operations here are a well-rehearsed routine.
There have been more arrests in connection with Arab terrorist attacks in European cities. In Rome, a former Libyan diplomat has been arrested in connection with a plot last year to kill the US ambassador Maxwell Rabb and other diplomats. Police investigating the nightclub bombing in Berlin, which prompted the American raid on Libya, have detained a Palestinian. It's thought he may be the brother of Nazar Hindawi, who's still being questioned in London about the Heathrow bomb plot.
Britain and her common market partners have agreed on new, tougher action against Libya. There'll be immediate restrictions on the number of Libyans in Europe, but there's no commitment to the trade embargo which the Americans have been pressing for. Britain's Foreign Secretary, Sir Geoffrey Howe, summed up today's Luxembourg agreement as a credible common market response against terrorism.
Sir Geoffrey Howe came to Luxembourg with his own Charter for Action, still urging the closure of all Libyan people's bureaus, but expecting the lesser sanctions Europe has finally agreed. A third foreign ministers' meeting in 8 days is unprecedented. This time, Libya's near neighbours, particularly Italy, abandoned their previous opposition to diplomatic warfare. Today, they accepted joint action to be presented as Europe's credible alternative to America's bombing. Only the Greeks held out into the afternoon, but eventually they too consented. The new measures could have been sterner, but then a few weeks ago they would scarcely have been discussed. Most significant, the community countries agreed to withdraw some of their diplomats from Libya, reducing representation at embassies in Tripoli to a minimum. Then Europe should follow up by expelling enough Libyans to reduce the People's Bureau diplomats so that the numbers match. Further than this, the Europeans agreed that any Libyans expelled from one community country should automatically be refused entry to any other, a major policy change if it is successfully carried out.
One of the features that has been understandably of concern in the United States and indeed in Europe has been the absence of a collective, effective international response. I think this will be seen as a much more effective response than has previously been experienced.
The strength of today's agreement is that the 12 together have agreed to reduce sharply the number of Libyans in Europe. The weakness is that those countries most reluctant to fall in line may not feel bound to implement the agreement too vigorously. But still, Europe's stance against Libya tonight is significantly tougher than it was a week ago. This is James Robbins for the 9 o'clock news in Luxembourg.
The Americans are being polite, but frankly, they're not much impressed. Even if the Europeans had decided all this a week ago, it wouldn't have been enough to stop the American strike against Libya. It won't now be enough to deter a second raid, even though the feeling's growing in London that the Americans won't want to do it again. European reluctance comes down to a matter of figures. Last year, the community as a whole exported £1.8 billion worth of goods to Libya, making it a useful medium-sized market. And we imported 3 times that amount, £5.6 billion worth. Almost all of that was oil, mostly for Italy and West Germany. Libyan oil is much cheaper now, following the collapse in the oil price, so this year's import figures will be lower. But both the West Germans and the Italians feel aggrieved that the Americans understand their problems so little. If you use a lot of Libyan oil, as they do, it's hard to change your supply on the spur of the moment. Something else that doesn't change is the EEC Commission's knack of picking embarrassing customers for its food surpluses. This ship contains 700 tons of beef, sold at a knockdown price, 35 pence a pound, to Libya. Tonight, MPs around Europe have protested at the deal. Only the beef farmers and, of course, the Libyans are happy.
The Prime Minister has been speaking tonight about the implications of her decision to support the American bombing of Libya. She said the government would be looking closely at the position of Libyans currently in this country being trained as pilots. Mrs. Thatcher agreed with the argument that although they were only trained in civilian aircraft, those skills could be transferred to military use.
The Libyan news agency says Britain is to be put back on what it calls the black file of the Arab world. It says the government's support for the American raid will damage Britain's interests in the Arab countries. The Libyans have again been taking foreign journalists to see the damage caused by last week's bombing. Today they travelled out of Tripoli to Benghazi, 500 miles along the coast.
The cluster bomb units were laid out on the beach near Benghazi. According to the Libyans, they'd been dropped at various places in the city. The casing breaks open to release a couple of hundred little bomblets. They're mainly an anti-personnel device. The Libyans were not forthcoming about some of the exact locations. A rehabilitation centre for the disabled had suffered some damage. The anonymous buildings behind, with a crumpled helicopter just in view, were the more likely target. Probably the Jamahiriya barracks complex, which was on the Americans' list. The Benina airport had been tidied up. What remains of aircraft hit on the apron are now a collection of scrap metal on waste ground. 2 helicopters, a heap of a Twin Otter and a Fokker F-27. A Boeing 727 of Libyan Airlines had a punctured fuselage. No mention was made of damage to military aircraft, but a good number of the hospital casualties we saw were soldiers. The Libyans have been selective in what they've shown to the press. But clearly the heaviest bomb drop occurred in Benghazi here, with a school midway on the long line of craters. It's difficult to see what the Americans were aiming for. There are several craters over a half-mile area, and this is very definitely a residential district. There may have been a discreetly sighted military target nearby, but we had driven past the main missile sites a mile away on the coast. Meanwhile, the school children, stirred by their teachers to a bout of revolutionary fervour for the visiting journalists, were sharing their schoolyard with an armed, unexploded bomb. A 500-pounder. They'd found it this morning, we were told. The pinpoint accuracy which is claimed for some modern military operations does not seem to have functioned for the Americans 100%. Benghazi and Tripoli, despite Libyan reticence, have definitely had military targets hit. But the people of both cities next to those targets took a share of the punishment. This is Kate Adey for the 9 o'clock news in Benghazi.
Many of the Britons who moved out of the Muslim area of Beirut on the advice of the British ambassador have arrived in Cyprus. The group left Lebanon this afternoon by ferry for the Cypriot port of Larnaca, though a few other Britons have preferred to take their chance and stay in Beirut.
The daily ferry arrived in Larnaca tonight with the last of the British refugees from West Beirut, men and women who'd spent several days in well-justified fear of their lives as pro-Libyan gunmen scoured the city for stray Westerners who might serve as victims of their vengeance.
I won't go back this time. I've been back several times, and I've been through several wars, 1 kidnapping, and 13 years. That's it. I've had enough.
Finished with Lebanon altogether?
Yes, definitely this time. And it was a long time. It took a lot to get me out.
What are you going to do?
For the moment, I'll stay around Cyprus and be able to walk around the streets and settle down a little bit, you know. I mean, we couldn't even go to the corner shop there, you know. We were really in a lot of danger.
The last few days certainly were straining because we felt we were the targets. Before that, well, there's fighting going on between militias. Occasionally there were bullets flying in that, but we weren't the targets. But then, in light of the kidnappings, and then particularly in light of the murders, well, we realized that we were very much on the firing line.
We dallied on the Green Line. We came to a full stop, the most dangerous part of West Beirut, the dividing line between West and East Beirut, and for some mysterious reason we stopped there. Eventually we moved off, but we got across safely.
What do you think it's like for the few people who've stayed behind?
It's going to be pretty horrific. It's going to get worse, I'm sure, and they are very, very worried.
The British and the Lebanese authorities joined forces to help these people to safety, but there can be no second chance for the few who decided, after all, to stay behind. This is Michael Sullivan for the 9 o'clock news in Cyprus.
Detectives from all over Britain met today to try to find a link between a number of cases of child murder and abduction. Under the codename Operation Shadow, they were looking again at about 20 cases going back 8 years, in the hope of finding some common clue.
Today's top-level conference was called by Scotland Yard's Head of Criminal Intelligence, Commander Philip Corbett. It was attended by detectives and forensic scientists from more than a dozen police forces, all hoping that Operation Shadow would highlight links between child murders and abductions stretching back to 1978. 13-year-old Jeanette Tate was the first youngster to disappear. She'd been delivering papers near her home in Devon. Similarly, Mark Tildesley vanished 2 years ago. Aged 7, he'd been going to a fun fair near his home in Wokingham. 14-year-old Jason Swift ran away from his North London home last July. He'd been known to associate with homosexuals. His naked body was found in Essex 5 months later. The body of another London boy, Barry Lewis, aged 6, was discovered a few miles from Jason's. Officers involved in the murder hunt realised there were other similarities. Traces of the same sleeping drug were found in both bodies. The realisation struck. If Jason's and Barry's deaths were linked, could the others be as well? Rivers used by anglers were common to several investigations. Police in Nottingham have spent today combing the banks of the River Trent, where Sarah Harper's body was discovered. Other possible strands have been emerging. In at least half the cases, there is proof or suspicion of homosexual overtones. A number of children were abducted at or near fun fairs. And another feature common to some investigations is the reported sighting of a red car. It could all be sheer coincidence, or it could point to the horrifying prospect of one man or even a gang being responsible for them all.
Certainly it's been interesting to hear of factors that are similar, but then that's not entirely unexpected, and it will take some time obviously to have those properly analysed and evaluated to see whether there is material that could benefit any of the inquiries.
There wasn't time to discuss all the cases, and the officers left having decided on another meeting, probably next week, but they maintain it's too early to say how far the links extend.
Britain's family doctors are facing their biggest shake-up since the National Health Service was formed nearly 40 years ago. A government discussion document recommends that doctors should be offered financial incentives to raise the quality and range of their medical care. It says patients should be able to make a better informed choice of doctor by being given more information about the services each doctor provides. They should be able to change their doctor more easily, and it should be easier for patients to make a complaint when things go wrong. Doctors should be encouraged to go on courses to keep themselves up to date, and all GPs should retire by the age of 70.
3 of the big building societies have cut their mortgage rates by 1% to 11%. New borrowers with the Halifax, Abbey National and Woolwich will benefit straight away. Existing borrowers will have to wait until June, but by then there may be scope for a larger cut. The people of Oxford have been out on the streets celebrating their football team's victory in the Milk Cup final on Sunday. Thousands crammed into the city centre to cheer the team as they showed off the trophy. It was Oxford's first appearance in a Wembley final, and tonight their chairman, Robert Maxwell, was there to join in the celebrations. And tonight's football results: West Ham's challenge for the First Division title was given a big boost with an 8-1 win at home to Newcastle. Watford against Nottingham Forest is a late kick-off.
King Juan Carlos and Queen Sofia of Spain begin a state visit to Britain tomorrow, the first by a Spanish monarch for more than 80 years. The visit has been discussed for 10 years, but postponed because of tension between Britain and Spain over Gibraltar. Christopher Morris looks at the reign of King Carlos and the prospects for tomorrow's visit.
When rebel civil guards stormed inside the Madrid Parliament 5 years ago, Spain's infant democracy seemed doomed. Led by the comic opera figure of Colonel Tejero, they held over 300 MPs hostage. An attempted coup which failed only because of the televised intervention of King Juan Carlos, warning his generals not to overthrow democracy. They obeyed, the conspirators surrendered, and Colonel Tejero shook hands with his men before arrest and a 30-year prison sentence.
I wasn't afraid because I knew what I had to do, and I wasn't afraid for Spain because I knew what the rest and what the whole majority of the armed forces and the people in general wanted and really needed for me to do that night.
The king undoubtedly saved Spaniards from a return to the bad old days of dictatorship as they'd suffered under General Franco. Cleverly, he's dismantled all military trappings of power to restore parliamentary democracy to Spain with free elections involving all political parties. Spain is now a member of the European Community and NATO. Juan Carlos, after reigning for 10 years, is now acclaimed king of all the Spaniards. But the issue of Spain's claim over Gibraltar remains. The king and queen boycotted Prince Charles's wedding because the honeymoon began in Gibraltar. But tomorrow that snub will be forgiven. Prince Charles and the Princess of Wales will personally welcome the royal visitors from Spain.
Christopher Morris, and now some late news. We've just heard from Scotland Yard that Nazar Hindawi has been charged in connection with the Heathrow bomb. He's accused of conspiring to murder Anne Murphy and others, and with attempting to destroy an aircraft in flight. Hindawi will appear at Lambeth Magistrates Court in London tomorrow afternoon.
And tonight's main story again. The Queen has been celebrating her 60th birthday with her family and her people. And among the thousands of tributes, each Commonwealth country has issued a set of stamps depicting the Queen at various stages of her life. Their way of saying happy birthday. That's the national and international news tonight. Good night.
Good night.
Now the Northwest news. There have been another 7 cases of salmonella poisoning at Park Lane Secure Hospital at Maghull near Liverpool. The 7 people affected have joined 3 others being treated in the medical centre at Park Lane. Manchester Crown Court heard allegations that a carrier of the AIDS virus bit 2 policemen after threatening to infect them with the killer disease. The prosecution said that mercifully they were not infected. The man, who's 28, lives in Manchester. He denies wounding the officers with intent. The trial continues tomorrow. A 24-year-old man from Stockport has been in court in the town charged with the murder of his father. Mark Christopher Brahney was remanded in custody for a week. A man aged 62 who's partially disabled is recovering after being beaten up for £20. The man was knocked out of his wheelchair outside his home in Liverpool and kicked about the head and body. Thousands of South Manchester rail commuters were late for work this morning because a bird's nest fell from a tree. It hit power cables and brought electric trains to a standstill for almost an hour. Old Trafford, home of Manchester United, will stage the first Rugby League test match between Great Britain and Australia in October. It'll be the first time Old Trafford has played host to a Rugby League test. A scheme to build up friendship between football supporters has been hailed as a success, despite the violence which marked the inaugural game between Wigan Athletic and Plymouth Argyle. Wigan's general manager, John Fillingham, said today the vast majority of fans have behaved well, and the 2 clubs had parted the best of friends. During the game, dogs were used to clear the pitch, and 11 arrests were made. A look at the region's weather. Rain at first will give way to clearer but still showery weather, but it will become mostly dry after midnight. Tomorrow, starting bright, but showers during the afternoon, and it'll be rather cold, temperatures reaching only 9 degrees Celsius, 48 Fahrenheit. A look at the national weather picture with John Kepley.
Good evening to you on a royal day. I'm sure it's quite appropriate that St Andrews in the east of Scotland should be the sunniest place in Britain today. Well over 12 hours of sunshine. If you're interested, I'm sure you're not, in Milford Haven, but you were the wettest place with about 3/4 of an inch, 19 millimetres, in new money. Now the reason for the contrast across the country is this frontal system here, which is currently straggling northern England, giving some pretty wet conditions just up there at the moment. But it's the area of low pressure really that's going to be more interesting over the next 24 hours, because that elongated low pressure area is going to split up You can see by 1900 tomorrow, we've got two separate centres, one in the southwest here and one up to the north of Scotland, if I can reach up there. And that means that the worst of tomorrow's weather is going to be round those areas of low pressure, but it won't be all that good even in between them. Well, at the moment, as I say, there's some quite wet weather over northern England. It's even snowing up on the Pennines as well, giving some pretty atrocious conditions. We'll find that that band of rain and snow gradually moves northwards during the course of the night, and these very heavy showers down in the south gradually begin to die out, but it'll be well into the second part of the night before they gradually do die out in the south. They'll probably keep going, in fact, down this southwestern corner here, with that cloud and rain moving up into northern parts of Scotland too. Now, it won't be a particularly cold night, but it will be a windy one, especially down in the south, running along the channel there. So tomorrow morning we're going to start off pretty grey up in Scotland there, cloudy, with further rain and sleet from time to time. But most of the parts of the country will start off bright, there'll be some sunshine around, but there'll be a fair number of showers right from the word go in this southwestern corner here. And as we go through the day, we're going to find a lot more showers breaking out willy-nilly right across the chart. But I think it's really the southwest, Wales, the West Midlands, central southern England, Devon and Cornwall, that area that's going to see the worst of the showers tomorrow, probably merging to give some fairly lengthy spells of rain, whereas the showers over on the eastern side here are fairly well scattered, at least for a good part of the day. But the temperatures, again, not too good tomorrow. 12 at best in East Anglia is 54, but a very chilly 7 in the north, and that's it.
In Crime Watch this month, a fire at a country house in Wales. As firemen fought the blaze, they discovered the body of 58-year-old farmer Richard Thomas. Helen, his sister, was found the next day. Both had been murdered. Who killed them and why is a mystery, but possible clues lie in the private life of the couple. And Crime Watch cameras will be at Edinburgh Police Headquarters for a major new appeal in the investigation into the deaths of 2 children. 11-year-old Susan Maxwell died in July 1982. She was last seen in the Scottish border town of Coldstream. A year later, 5-year-old Caroline Hogg was abducted from the seafront at Portobello near Edinburgh. Both children were found dead in the Midlands. Police will reveal new evidence which could help identify a double killer. Watch Crime Watch UK. We'll be waiting for your call.
And that's on Thursday at 9:30 on BBC1.
On BBC 2 shortly, the next episode of the major drama series from Germany, Heimat. While here on 1 in 40 minutes, we'll be looking back on today's events to celebrate the Queen's 60th birthday. Now, in a change to tonight's panorama, David Dimbleby reports on the aftermath of the Libyan raid. Terrorism, the elusive enemy. On BBC 2, in 20 minutes, the World Professional Snooker Championship from Sheffield, with the match between Jimmy White and John Virgo. And here on BBC 1, we'll be going to Sheffield at 11 o'clock. Now, Sue Lawley looks back on today's events celebrating Her Majesty the Queen's 60th birthday.